However you feel about the lowbrow films of Seann William Scott, it's hard to deny that he's good at what he does. Watch as we rank Scott's wild filmography from mess to best. It's really more a question of who isn't in the notoriously bad movie 43 rather than who is. So perhaps it was inevitable that Seann William Scott would pop up. Featuring a host of A-listers, the 2013 anthology movie presents several interconnected short films linked by the concept that they're all movie pitch ideas from Charlie Wessler, played by Dennis Quaid. The real Wessler produced the much-maligned film, memorably described by critic Richard Roper, who wrote, "Movie 43 is the Citizen Kane of awful." Scott and his Dukes of Hazzard co-star Johnny Knoxville play roommates Brian and Pete in the segment titled Happy Birthday, where the pair fall afoul of a potty-mouthed leprechaun and his equally obscene brother, both played by Gerard Butler. In a film that consistently plumbs the depths of poor taste, Scott's segment is one of the worst. In Courtney Cox's 2014 feature directorial debut, Just Before I Go, Scott plays Ted, who returns to his hometown to reconcile with people from his past before he dies by suicide. The larger-than-life Scott delivers an uncharacteristically understated performance in this film, and yet it's his performance that leaves this film feeling utterly directionless.
Set my life on the path to ruin, and this is funny to you?
You dried up, withered old clam? What are you smiling about?
It isn't uncommon for dramedies to take on some pretty serious subject matter, but this one doesn't seem to know what it wants to be, or why. At times formulaic and overly sentimental, Just Before I Go also tries to be a risque comedy, and never quite balances the two ideas. More than perhaps any other film on this list, this one represents the raucous comedies Scott was known for, and the more serious direction his career went in afterward. The reboot no one was asking for. The Dukes of Hazzard took inspiration from the 70s TV show, but bore very little resemblance to the original series. Here, cousins Beau, played by Scott, and Luke, played by Johnny Knoxville, along with their younger relative Daisy, played by Jessica Simpson, strive to protect their family's land in the wider county from corrupt lawmakers.
Read my name tag, friend.
I noticed your initials were double D.
While the plot doesn't sound dissimilar to an episode of the hit show, the film favors endless car chases and gratuitous shots of the famous short shorts over anything more meaningful. The result is something that feels incredibly shallow, and not even the natural chemistry of Knoxville and Scott can save it. The whole thing feels like a shameless attempt to capitalize on an existing property with little thought given to its purpose. Stoner and slacker comedies were a big deal in the 90s and early aughts. They brought with them a wave of iconic double acts, Beavis and Butthead, Bill and Ted, Dante and Randall, all of whom meandered through a haze of their respective movies and shows with good humor and a carefree attitude. However, the pair at the center of Dude, Where's My Car, Jesse and Chester, don't belong in this pantheon of greats. Our protagonists are two bros who black out after a night of partying and struggle to remember where they left their car. There's nothing wrong with films lacking in intricate plot details. That is, after all, the thing that often defines a slacker comedy. But Dude, Where's My Car is so light on story that it barely feels like a film. The film has one joke, and it becomes unfunny pretty quick. If there's anything good to be said about this film, it's that Scott and Kutcher are well cast. It's a shame the film gives them very little to do. Scott made his name in comedies, but in his later career, he's ventured into more serious dramatic roles, like in this Keanu Reeves-produced 2019 drama. In Already Gone, Scott plays Martin, the abusive stepfather of a teen named Robinson. Tired of living in fear, Robinson runs away with his stepfather's girlfriend, an exotic dancer named Keisha, who'd also been abused by Martin. Robinson and Keisha are unlikely companions, but they find in each other the hope of overcoming their shared traumas. Or so we think. Martin remains a threat throughout, and his reappearance towards the end of the film provokes an interesting conversation on the codependency of abusive relationships. But the film doesn't take the time to examine this. The result is a film that's as forgettable and fleeting as the title would suggest. Kevin Smith's films can be an acquired taste. This comedy, however, is a little more vanilla than some of his other offerings, although it's not without the director's trademark potty humor. Cop Out focuses on police officers Jimmy and Paul as they hunt down petty thief Dave, played by Scott, who has stolen a rare baseball card. Considering the talent involved, Cop Out has all the makings of a great comedy. Unfortunately, it's severely lacking in jokes and ends up being painfully bland. As Dave, Scott has a handful of funny moments, but his sole character trait is that he's annoying.
Chip, do you see what he's doing? He's trying to live here rent-free.
Now, don't get us wrong, Scott can play annoying really well, but in this case, that's all the character has to offer. Having worked with Smith on Jay and Silent Bob's Strike Back, it's easy to see why Scott would be drawn to this film. In an interview with Cinema.com, Scott was full of praise for the project, saying, "I just wanted to be a part of it, because I'm a huge fan of Smith and everybody in it." A film that sells itself on that person's name is funny comes with the lowest of expectations. Even so, 2007's Mr. Woodcock manages to be even more disappointing than you anticipate. Scott plays John Farley, a best-selling author who's shocked to learn his mother is marrying his high school gym teacher, Mr. Woodcock.
That's called a takedown.
As a boy, John was one of the many students victimized by Woodcock, and the experience spurred him to write motivational books about overcoming past traumas. In better hands, Mr. Woodcock had the potential to explore the long-term impact of bullying and how it affects a person in their adult life, while still embracing the absurdity of your mom dating your former teacher. Instead, it features crass humor and phallic jokes, as John and Woodcock compete in a series of challenges to try and knock the other down a peg. There's some reconciliation between the pair at the end, but it avoids the notions of generational trauma and toxic masculinity in favor of unnecessary posturing. Perhaps we're expecting too much from a film with a crude joke in its title, but it's disappointing nonetheless. Every once in a while, a film comes along that not only makes a huge cultural impact but influences the aesthetics of cinema going forward. Following the 1999 release of The Matrix, plenty of copycats emerged, all trying to emulate the flashy editing, mind-blowing martial arts, and unique visual style of the sci-fi classic. One of those copycats was 2003's Bulletproof Monk, featuring the unlikely pairing of the legendary Chow Yun-fat and Seann William Scott. Scott plays Carr, a selfish no-good Nick chosen by a mysterious monk to become the new guardian of a precious scroll. While there are hints of an interesting odd couple dynamic between Scott and Chow, Bulletproof Monk is extremely derivative, and Scott in particular feels woefully miscast.
This is America. We don't have enlightenment here. We have strip clubs, Las Vegas, and HBO.
The film is shot like a music video, all style and very little substance, which is understandable given director Paul Hunter's previous work. David Edelstein, writing for Slate, was particularly scathing about Hunter's direction, saying he has no idea where to put the camera for dramatic impact or how to move people around in the frame. Over the course of Scott's career, he's appeared in a multitude of copycats that pale in comparison to the films that inspired them. Such is the case with 2009's Balls Out, Gary the Tennis Coach, a film that shamelessly piggybacks on the goodwill of surprise hit Dodgeball, a true underdog story. Scott plays janitor-turned-tennis coach Gary, who's tasked with training a bunch of young tennis players. There are pieces of the story that work, but it lacks the crucial element that made Dodgeball a hit: likable characters and good humor. Like so many of Scott's films, Balls Out is stupid and puerile, with a shortage of good jokes. Adding kids to the mix offers the opportunity to be endearing and uplifting, but Balls Out instead relies on gross-out gags with no heart to provide a balance. You can see the thumbprints of movies like 2001's The Fast and the Furious all over this straight-to-DVD action flick. Where the former became one of the biggest movie franchises of all time, this largely forgotten film remains in obscurity. It focuses largely on Scott's character, Ben McEwen, a man indebted to some powerful gangsters, who assembles a group to pull off an elaborate heist, using the noise generated by a loud party as a distraction. Given all that, you can expect this film to be noisy, but the never-ending, pulsating techno track makes it almost unwatchable. Still, with the current nostalgia for all things 2000s, there's an odd throwback charm to this movie that's so intrinsically of that time. Largely panned by critics, the BBC's Neil Smith at least acknowledged Scott's potential, writing, "Scott displays enough loose charm to suggest he may have a future beyond the dumb teen farces in which he made his name." Not to be confused with the 2000 Jason Biggs comedy Loser, American Loser is a low-budget black comedy that allows Scott to branch out a little from the one-dimensional loudmouths he was known for. Scott's character, Jeff, was brought up in a wealthy household, but that doesn't stop him from doing everything possible to screw up his life.
Work it to own it because you're in it to win it.
Relying on his mom for money, Jeff battles alcoholism before eventually getting sober. But even then, he can't seem to catch a break. His life is one mishap after another. When Jeff meets Lynn, however, he finds his purpose and decides to make a better life for them both. As a figure of ridicule trying to prove his worth, Jeff becomes a surprising stand-in for Scott himself, and American Loser gives the actor a chance to show he has more depth than his previous roles afforded him. While the film lacks nuance, it is nonetheless a surprisingly enjoyable tragicomedy. While Scott only has a cameo role in this 2018 sequel, it's certainly memorable. Opening the film in what we later learn is a dream sequence, Scott plays Trooper Callahan, a highway patrol officer who pulls over a speeding bus. On board, he finds his favorite band Cracklin' Bacon smoking weed and partying. When his partner joins him on the bus, the band members almost goad them into kissing.
Fist bumps!
Pelvic thrust.
Shake your tail, brother!
See that ass? Now kiss each other.
Writing for The Wrap, critic William Bibbiani said, "The opening minutes of the Broken Lizard comedy Super Troopers 2 are so breathlessly funny, they might asphyxiate you. Unfortunately, the rest of the film struggles to maintain its comic momentum." Largely due to Scream in 1996, teen slasher movies enjoyed a resurgence in the decade that followed, and Final Destination remains one of the best examples. In the film, Alex is moments away from his plane taking off when he has a terrifying premonition. The plane is going to explode and kill everyone on board. After creating a scene, Alex, along with some of his classmates and a teacher, is removed from the plane, and they watch in horror as the premonition proves true. The group tries to carry on as normal, but death soon catches up with them. Scott plays Billy Hitchcock, one of the students who's taken off the plane.
Oh wait, I didn't fight with anyone!
Not only does Scott have the best reaction to seeing the plane crash, but he has one of the film's most iconic death scenes, narrowly avoiding being hit by a speeding train before being decapitated by a piece of shrapnel. Final Destination doesn't reinvent the wheel, but unlike most slashers, the film lacks a mass killer, which gives it an air of unpredictability and some ridiculously inventive kills. Like Scream, Final Destination had a good enough premise to justify several sequels, with Final Destination 6 rumored to be in the works. Ivan Reitman's Evolution is a throwback sci-fi comedy that's cut from the same cloth as Ghostbusters, its specter-destroying predecessor. After a meteor collides with Earth, bringing with it an alien life form, a group of so-called experts assemble to try and save the world. Professors Ira Kane and Harry Block are joined by researcher Dr. Allison Reed and firefighter Wayne Gray, played by Scott. Together, they represent humanity's only hope. Scott's character is very much a fish out of water, having witnessed the meteor crash and now somehow along for the ride. It's the kind of role he excels in, the unsuspecting everyman caught up in an adventure he never should have been in. Evolution is uneven in places and pales in comparison to Ghostbusters, but there's still a lot of fun to be had. Scott doesn't seem like the obvious choice to play a serial killer, but maybe that's what makes this horror mystery so appealing. From the outside, Scott's character, Evan, appears to have a great life, complete with a steady job as a social worker, a wife, and a new infant son. Beneath this seemingly ordinary facade, however, he hides a twisted streak. Inspired by his work with vulnerable kids, Evan embarks on a bloodthirsty revenge mission, seeking out and killing the adults who abused them. Evan behaves like a Robin Hood Grim Reaper, playing the quintessential anti-hero by doing away with people who've committed heinous acts themselves. While critical reactions were mixed, many agreed that Scott's performance was the standout element of the film. Variety's Dennis Harvey wrote, "It confirms that Scott shouldn't have stopped starring in movies when he aged out of the cinematic frat house." In the latter half of the aughts, Scott progressed from playing obnoxious college jerks to slightly more mature characters. 2008's The Promotion saw him take on the role of unassuming grocery store assistant manager, Doug Stauber. Doug has his eye on the manager position at his store's new branch location. He believes he's the best man for the job, but he faces some competition in the form of new arrival Richard Wellner. The rivalry between Doug and Richard isn't mean-spirited. In fact, both of them are likable and relatable characters, despite their flaws. While they're competing for the same job, the pair are really just competing for the chance to make a better life for their families, and there's something endearing about that. As is the case with almost every movie in the View Askew-niverse, the world created by Kevin Smith, there's the sense that Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back is one big inside joke that not everyone is in on. If you are in on it, however, this film will tick all the boxes. It sets Jay and Silent Bob up in a meta-adventure to stop Hollywood from making a movie about them. Scott pops up along the way as animal activist Brent. In what you can only imagine is a deliberate move on Smith's part, Brent chastises Jay for his foul language and the vulgar way he talks to girls, in direct contradiction to Scott's potty-mouthed roles, before he's tricked into making a lewd confession regarding sheep. 2000's Road Trip was one of many films riding the coattails of American Pie. As bawdy teen sex comedies go, however, this is one of the better offerings. After making a huge, potentially relationship-ending blunder, Josh drags three friends, including Scott's character, E.L., on a cross-country road trip to intercept an offending package heading for Josh's girlfriend, Tiffany. Road Trip might not offer the genre anything new, but there are plenty of hijinks to be had between the four leads. There's no denying that Road Trip is lowbrow, and Scott is essentially playing Stifler 2.0. But there was a huge market for comedies like this at the time, and there arguably still is. Whether it's Jay and Silent Bob Strikes Back or Super Troopers 2, Scott has consistently proven that he only needs one scene to make a major impact. Perhaps the best example of this comes in 2003's Old School, when Scott has a memorable interaction and mullet in a scene with Will Ferrell.
Yes! That's awesome!
The film focuses on three 30-something best friends who relive their college days after attorney Mitch moves into a new place following the breakdown of his relationship. The concept of Old School is great in and of itself, but when you also have comedic heavy hitters like Will Ferrell, Vince Vaughn, Luke Wilson, and director Todd Phillips involved, you know you're onto a winner. In addition to all the raunchy, immature antics, the film makes us think about the idea of lost youth and how the desire to go back to the glory days can prevent one from growing up. Above all, this film is really dumb and very funny. and Scott's mullet is worth the price of admission. Not for the last time, Scott and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson prove they have terrific chemistry in this enjoyable buddy action movie from 2003. Johnson plays muscle-bound bounty hunter Beck, who is tasked with finding his boss's son, the cocksure Travis, played by Scott. The film plays with the classic one last job trope, and the world-weary Beck is already over Travis's antics before he's even met him, something that only serves their natural rapport. The rundown is a fast and funny action romp in which Scott once again demonstrates that he's at his best when he's playing against the straight man. It was also a sign of the greatness to come from Dwayne Johnson. His acting career was in its infancy at this point, who is now one of the most bankable box office stars in Hollywood. Whereas Seann William Scott's face could be seen everywhere in the aughts, these days he seems to be much more selective with his roles. They may not be as high profile, but he's taking on much more interesting and gritty characters, as evidenced by his appearance in 2023's The Wrath of Becky. This sequel to the 2020 film Becky sees the titular teenage girl embarking on a bloody revenge mission after a group of incels attack her home and steal her dog. Your brain might immediately leap to John Wick, and you'd be on the right track, as The Wrath of Becky seems to delight in having a similar premise. However, where John Wick has evolved into a sprawling action franchise, this film keeps things simple, and the result is something that is gory, fun, and incredibly cathartic. The star of the show is Lulu Wilson as Becky, but Scott is genuinely convincing as the ringleader of the extremist noblemen group. Perhaps, like fellow 90s and aughts star Brendan Fraser, we could be on the brink of a Seann William Scott renaissance. If this film is anything to go by, then that's a really good thing. Director Richard Kelly's follow-up to Donnie Darko, 2006's Southland Tales, baffled audiences and critics at the time of its release. Set in an alternative 2008, this dystopian movie brings together a cast of rogue characters, including action star Boxer Santeros, porn star Chris Tanau, and Scott's corrupt police officer Roland Taverner, and a mind-bending satire.
Scientists are saying the future is going to be far more futuristic than they originally predicted.
Admittedly, Southland Tales isn't always the easiest movie to enjoy, and it's understandable that it took critics a little while to warm to it. Donnie Darko was thematically rich, but it had a subtlety to it, whereas Southland Tales is the exact opposite. It's brazenly ambitious, and requires multiple viewings to try and unpack everything, but it's a remarkable achievement. What is equally remarkable is that Scott appears in a film as out there as this one, and his dual role as Roland and Ronald Taverner is undoubtedly one of his best performances. American Pie is unquestionably of its time, but it was a huge cultural touchpoint in the late 90s, launching a resurgence of the raunchy teen sex comedy in a big way. Jim, Kevin, Oz, Finch, and Scott's character Stifler are on the brink of adulthood. But there's a huge problem. All of them except Stifler are virgins. With their hormones and libidos raging, the film explores the ups and downs of the group's conquests. Often led, or perhaps misled by Stifler's interjections, the unlucky in love quartet desperately try to woo the girls at their school. Stifler is usually on the periphery of the main action, but he steals the film with some of the crassest and most outrageous lines. This was Scott's breakout role, one which, for better or worse, became the reason the actor was predominantly typecast in similar characters for the majority of his career. Nevertheless, this film and this character, whom Scott reprised in 3 of its sequels, are what many still associate with the actor, and there's something to be said for that to continue to be true all these years later. The late aughts were tumultuous for Scott, but for every dud like Mr. Woodcock and Balls Out, there were surprise gems like Southland Tales and 2008's Role Models. Where the ambitious Southland Tales saw Scott stepping out of his comfort zone, Role Models had him back in more familiar territory. After a brush with the law, Paul Rudd's Danny and Scott's Wheeler are faced with a choice between a stint in jail or community service. They opt for the latter and find themselves mentoring a pair of youths through the Big Brother-style scheme Sturdy Wings. Paired with the nerdy Augie and potty-mouthed Ronnie, Danny and Wheeler managed to learn something about themselves along the way. Role Models feels like a wonderful full-circle moment, with both Rudd and Scott now older, if not wiser, than when they began their careers, starring opposite young, up-and-coming talents. The film still has the vulgarity and immaturity you expect, but it also has moments of pathos that are surprisingly sweet. As hockey fans know, fighting is an intrinsic and entertaining part of the game, and there are often players who are selected for their scrapping abilities as well as their proficiency on the ice. Based on the true story of Doug Smith, Goon sees Scott take on the role of a nice but tough Doug Glatt, whose main right hook propels him from the bar to the rink. The film pulls no punches. It's surprisingly brutal and bloody in places. Yet it also manages to be incredibly endearing, transcending the cliches of the sports movie genre to become something completely different. Despite favorable reviews, Goon bombed at the box office. However, it's still widely regarded as Scott's best performance, perfectly balancing crudeness with heart and evoking genuine sympathy. Doug isn't the easiest character to portray, and he's a good distance away from some of Scott's more one-dimensional characters. As well as having to convincingly play Doug as a tough-as-nails enforcer, Scott also has to portray a softer side, one that's polite and easy to root for, and he sells this completely.